Hello, everyone, and welcome to my live virtual book tour, day 6. It is day 6. This is the 6th event for my live virtual book tour. And if you guys don't already know, my name is Kayla Canoe. I'm an author, YouTuber, gamer, and aerialist. And for today's event, we are going to be reading Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is being read today. And there we go. Chapter 4 is being read. What else? I'm so distracted over here. So I was just writing boys love, and now we're like switching over into dark fantasy. So we're going to be reading some dark fantasy today. If you guys missed the previous events, they are all linked below. So if you did miss them, you'll probably want to check those out first, because we're doing chapter 4 today, and the other 3 can be heard in the previous videos. Boom, there we go. That's what we're doing today. And I have already pinned the content warnings for the material in the chat. And if you guys don't already know, The Reckoning is coming out in 2 days. This is launch week for The Reckoning, my debut novel. All the information about it is linked below. You can pre-order your ebooks today, or in 2 days you can order physical copies. So paperback, hardback, have both options are going to be available, which I'm super excited about. Oh, goodness. My newsletter is linked below if you guys want to stay up to date on all my books that are coming out. I will be publishing this whole series in like the next 4 or 5 years, and there's going to be like 7 books. So if you want to know when it's coming before it comes, subscribe to my newsletter. That being said, content warnings before we get going. This is an adult dark fantasy novel. It is intended for adult audiences. So if you are not 18 years of age or older, this might not be the place for you right now. And my cat is joining me. Hello, Charlie. Anyway, content warnings include beatings, blood and gore, lots of blood, guys, lots of blood, rape, explicit description on that as well, violence, both physical and psychological abuse, death, murder, trauma, victim blaming, loss of a loved one. Did I mention abuse? Yeah, we got some heavy topics in this dark novel. So if you don't like heavy topics mixed with LGBTQ plus romance and polyamory and all kinds of other fun stuff, there is your warning. You have been warned. I hope I don't trigger anyone. And we are going to get right on into this. I have lovely bookmarks, guys, if you haven't seen them. And Kai, chapter 4 is Kai's perspective. Look at the beautiful, beautiful page. All right, I shut it off. Chapter 4, Kai. Pressed for time, I walked briskly through the palace halls. My father had summoned the council, and I was expected to be there. It had taken longer than expected to cram myself into the bloody suit he requested, so I had to hurry. Tardiness was unacceptable, especially for a prince. I sighed in relief when I reached the council room. My father had yet to arrive. The other council members were already there. They stood behind their seats, which were arranged around the long wooden table that sat in the middle of the room. My parents' seats were at the head of the table, while mine was at the opposite end. Just barely reaching my seat in time, the doors to the council room were thrust open, and my father made his grand entrance. He wore a black silk tunic embellished with silver thread and a surcoat that had the dark blood family crest embroidered on the left chest panel. His silver mantle floated across the floor as he took his place at the head of the table. The silver crown atop his head fit perfectly between his large, ram-like horns and was balanced by the many rings he wore on his gray-skinned fingers. Of all the rings he wore, the family ring was the largest. It was made of silver with our family crest etched into each side, topped with a black diamond at the center. I wore the exact same ring and had always admired our family crest. It was an outline of a dark creature with large, feathered wings that held onto a shield. The shield was divided into 4 sections, a small shield with the letter D at its center. Each section had its own representation of the family. A crown to show our royal bloodline, the moonstone to show our power and connection to the goddess Hecate, an inverted pentagram to show our demonic origins, and a ring to symbolize our strength. My mother trailed behind my father, following him to the head of the table. Made to match my father, she wore a black dress that blended in with her charcoal-colored skin, and a small silver crown that stood out against her jet-black hair. Her jewelry was not as decadent as my father's, but she did have an embellished black fur over her shoulders. She looked at me with her fire-colored eyes as she passed by. "Be seated, we have much to discuss," my father said as he took his seat. The rustle of chairs echoed around the room as we all bowed and took our seats. Once the noise settled, my father began. "Evan, what is the status of Tor Terran?" "Conditions continue to worsen, Your Majesty. Riots are happening every few weeks. The people are not happy about the food shortages," Evan replied. Evan was the Tor Terran ambassador, though I never understood how he got elected for it. He was a rather plain, light-skinned human who dressed casually compared to the rest of the council. His hair and eyes were the same ordinary shade of brown. The Tor Terran emblem embroidered on his chest was the most interesting thing about him. It was a tree encompassed by a circle that looked like waves on the sea. "Field Marshal, have your troops been dispatched as requested?" my father asked, looking at Vladimir. Even though the field marshal was Daniel's father, they looked quite different. Vladimir had the common Talak traits that Daniel lacked: large tusks that extended out from his lower jaw and rounded ears. However, they did share the same white hair and hazel eyes. "Yes, sir. Troops have reached even the smallest towns. They've managed to keep civil order thus far, but the rioters continue to be persistent," he replied. The dress uniform he wore was heavily decorated with colorful bars and ribbons representing his many military achievements. As long as I could remember, he had always been in control of my father's armies. "You have my permission to use any force necessary. Make an example out of those rioters. I will not have unrest in my streets," my father replied. He was always quick to send soldiers to keep the people in line, but a military presence wasn't going to fix the real problem. "Pardon me, Your Majesty, but shouldn't we consider rationing the Dark Nation's food supply to give aid to outer cities and towns?" I said. All the eyes in the room turned to look at me. "Absolutely not. We cannot raise awareness of the issue. If the farmers can't feed themselves, then they can starve," my father snapped. I understood that he didn't want the Dark Nation's people to find out about the dying lands, as it would cause panic in our city, but our outer regions needed help. "Might I offer a suggestion?" Pope Klin asked. He was a rather thin, light-skinned human with dark red hair that was braided back into a bun. As a holy man, Klin wore a clergy robe that held representation for all 3 of our gods. It had a mix of black, white, and purple colors that were trimmed with decorations of silver and gold. I envied him. My attire wasn't allowed to be so colorful. "Of course, Your Holiness," my father replied. "The church could sponsor a food drive. We would advertise that donations would go to those in need without bringing attention to the current blight. I'm sure people would be happy to please the gods by helping others," Pope Klin said. The smile on his face irked me. "That's a great idea," my father replied, smiling in the Pope's direction. "It won't solve the problem long term, but it might afford us a little time," Pope Klin said. "We should consider asking the other nations for aid as well. If the land continues to die at its current rate, many people won't survive the winter," I added. "Have you lost your damn mind? Asking the neighboring kingdoms for aid would cause just as much panic as broadcasting the barren farmlands. We'd have a fucking uprising on our hands. Is that what you want?" my father shouted. All the men in the room sat up straighter, shoulders pulled back. Heat rose within me as I clenched my fists under the table. The familiar electric tingle of dark magic swirled inside my veins, but I forced it down. I couldn't lose my temper, not in front of my father. "Pardon me, Your Majesty, but I also have a suggestion. Daniel's words broke the tension in the room and drew my father's focus away from me. My father never listened to any of my suggestions, even though I'd been on the council for over 5 years. The day I turned 15, he insisted I attend the meetings, but I had zero sway. Thankfully, Daniel was part of the council. He often served as a buffer between me and my father. Continue, my father replied, his eyes focused on Daniel. We should have the reckoning. It would give the people something to be excited about while they struggle through the winter months. Their misery wouldn't seem so bad in comparison to the people suffering to survive the reckoning, Daniel said with a grin. Field Marshal Darkson, you should be proud of this genius son of yours, my father said. Thank you, Your Majesty, Vladimir grinned. He looked at his son in a way I wished my father would look at me, full of pride. My father only ever looked at me with disappointment. Your Majesty, before you make a decision on this, I would like to point out that having the reckoning now would break hundreds of years of tradition, said Grand Duke Dmitri Darkborn, the voice of reason and my father's right-hand man. He was Harrison's father, and their likeness was uncanny. They had the same olive-colored skin, long pointed ears, and piercing green eyes. I could only tell them apart because Dmitri had long brown hair that trailed most of the way down his back. He sat beside my father with his hair down, with only a few strands pulled back to keep it out of his face. It draped over the front of his black jacket, which was trimmed in elaborate silver designs. He dressed nearly as ostentatiously as my father, with his hands covered in silver jewelry. The reckoning was created so that the original dark blood and light blood families could find warriors worthy of sharing their magical connections with. They designed it to test the loyalty and strength of those who would become the family's protectors. With all the riots in the outer areas, I think the people would understand the king's choice to break with tradition. They'd understand his need for loyal and worthy warriors, Harrison said. My lips parted, but I said nothing. Harrison dressed like his father and shared the same love of history and tradition, yet he publicly spoke out in opposition. I looked to Dmitri, but there were no signs of anger about him, no clenched fists, no grinding teeth, not even a raised brow. Harrison's opposition didn't faze him at all. How the bloody hell was he not bothered? If I opposed my father, he'd beat me half to death and throw me in the dungeon for a night. Well, there you have it, gentlemen. Spoken from the mouths of babes, my father said as he gestured toward Harrison with a wide grin on his face. You never cease to amaze me. I'll be proud the day I can call you son. My eye twitched as I took in his words. Harrison had always been his favorite. It didn't matter what he did. My father always praised him. I felt the prickle of my magic in my veins again, but this time it wasn't caused by anger. Guards, my father shouted, and the doors flew open. A large Talak stood in his silver plate mail and looked to my father for his orders. Send for the seers. Tell them the king requests their audience at once. Yes, Your Majesty. The guard bowed and left the room. My father stood from his chair, and everyone else followed suit. This meeting is adjourned. I must prepare for my audience with the seers. The council members bowed as my father walked out of the room. My mother followed closely behind him. I wondered what my father had done to break her. She lacked the spirit she had when I was a child. Senseless chatter filled the room once my father was gone, the reckoning being the main subject. I didn't care for pointless conversations, so I left. Unfortunately, Harrison caught up to me before I even made it halfway down the corridor. Do you think we'll be called? Harrison asked as he walked beside me. I had to take a deep breath before I could respond. The electric tingle of dark magic still plagued me. Of course we will, I replied. Even if the seers don't pick us, my father will make sure we're added to the list. My father would use the reckoning as an excuse to make my life even more miserable. You really think so? It's such an honor to be called. He'll use it as a test to make sure we're worthy of our bloody titles. The swirling magic within me began to seep out. It created a dark aura around me, but Harrison paid it no mind. Well, I'm up for the challenge, Harrison smiled. He was always quick to jump at the opportunity to please my father. His loyalty knew no bounds. A bloody, perfect son he was. I'll catch up with you later, I said as I turned down the hall that led to my room. Harrison waved me off without another word. He could tell when I didn't want to talk, and he respected that. I managed to get back to my room without being stopped. Locking the doors behind me, I went to my bed. I opened the secret panel in the wall behind it to reveal a journal and several other notebooks. Writing was nearly as useless as feelings were, according to my father, so I had to keep my hobby a secret. For a moment, I thought to grab my journal, to write about how my father had treated me during the meeting. Instead, I grabbed one of my notebooks. I'd escape my harsh reality by exploring the lives of the characters of my story. They could go anywhere and do anything. And that is the end of chapter 4. Oh, guys, I love Kai so much. I love Kai. I love his perspective. I hope you guys enjoyed it. The council meeting was lots of fun to write. And yeah, lots of characters and information in that one. Kitty reads along as Kayla reads. Nice. One day, lots of people can read along. Oh, that is it, guys. That is chapter 4. I hope you guys enjoyed it. The book releases in 2 days. 2 days, guys. I'm just gonna keep showing it to you. I just really love my magic symbols and my publishing company logo. I know I keep showing you guys this, but look how beautiful it is. It's sci-fi because it's science fiction and fantasy. Because Queer SF is my publishing company. Queer SF Books, if you guys didn't know, that's what it's called. I actually have this logo, the same logo, but it's in like rainbow colors for when I make a website eventually for the company. I'm so excited. It's so beautiful. It's all so beautiful. I can't believe that 2 days. 2 days, guys. 2 days. I have been working on this for so long. So long. And yeah, actually, what I have not mentioned and forgot to mention is that Blue interviewed me for a podcast. So on release day, I'm not sure exactly what time it's going to come out, but after my live launch party, Blue is going to be posting a podcast in which we talk. She interviews me. She probes me. I answer questions. My puppy's kind of loud today, and I apologize. He is just being crazy back there. But yeah, podcast, interview, live streams. The next one is tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I will be reading chapter 5. If you guys are just now getting here, just now seeing this, if you missed anything, you can catch all of these live events on the replay because they will be up and available, and there's a playlist for them linked below. Yeah, and that's it. Unless you guys have any questions, I really don't have anything else for today. Although, yes, Kitty reads along as Kayla reads. I love this. Blue also loves Kai. Yes. Oh, Kitty, Harrison, he breaks my heart. I know. Harrison is such a little cinnamon roll. I love him. Oh, I love him. And yes, my puppy can tell I'm excited, so he is also now excited. But I'm excited, and chapter 5 is from Tyler's perspective, so we'll go back to seeing our Lady Tyler tomorrow and see what's going on with her in Nottin, in Addersfield, because that's where they are. All right. Thank you guys for stopping in and watching this today, and I will hopefully see you guys all tomorrow. Bye.